So thank you, everyone. Let's come back on. Go ahead. Go ahead. So thank you, everyone, as we start to transition our way back in. As we start to transition our way back in, we are going to give our financial team an opportunity to get set up. We have had county council come out of their executive session and taking the appropriate motions and voting on that. And now we're going to actually move on with our agenda. Listed under session 1, we have a fiscal update, and we're going to turn the podium over to Assistant County Administrator Lori Thomas, as well as Office of Budget and Grants Management Director Madison Wilkerson. And the agenda does show the Finance Director, Stacey Ham, to be a part of this process, but unfortunately, she is ill on this morning. We wish her well, and we are going to move forward with the program. So, ACA Thomas, if you will come get set up, and we will move on with the fiscal update.
Good morning. I'm going to give just a moment more to allow some of our team to get set up. In addition this morning to myself and Director Wilkerson that will be presenting, we're so pleased to have with us again this morning somebody that most of you have all seen, David Cheatwood with First Tryon Advisors, who is our financial advisor. As we start talking about some of our fund balances and some of our borrowings and debt limits and things of that nature, of course, one of our strategic initiatives is moving our capital projects forward. And a lot of the background with capital projects is how much can we actually afford to do. And as you all know, David is great, and he can help us to look at all of our options and help you to understand more fully where our considerations are lying and what we might look at moving forward. But with that, if we are ready, we'll start with our 5-year historical performance. These are our fund balances, and fund balances are broken down into categories. Sure. I think it's tab 3.
Thank you.
So as you all are aware, the county operates by fund. The most familiar fund that we work with is the general fund. That's your general county operations, and that's going to be everything that you see there with the 1100 numbers. And when we talk about fund balance, we talk about it in several ways. One is non-spendable. Non-spendable fund balance are things like your inventories that you have on hand that you've already purchased. That can't be spent, but that do have a value and are counted towards your fund balance, that if you had to liquidate, that can be a consideration. The second is your committed fund balance. These are commitments that we have that we must keep the funding there for. Some of the things that fall there are our economic development funds, funding for our self-insurance. Those are the big components in that bucket. Next is assigned, and those are monies that we have assigned for specific for purposes. And while we've assigned them for purposes and we're holding them there are some that can be considered that if we wanted to, they could be considered to be reallocated. Lastly is your unassigned. Your unassigned fund balance, keep that in the back of your head sort of as your a savings account, if you will. The general rule of thumb and the best practice by the Government Finance Officers Association is that you should have between 20 and 35% of the prior year's expenditures in your unassigned fund balance. We are well within that at $45.3 million at the end of 2024. However, I will remind you that what I like to do to look at this is to look at it in rather than in retrospect, in prospect. In prospect, if I look at it based on what our budgeted expenditures are for 2025, we are at just over 20.6% of those expenditures, with our expenditures for this year being about $225 million. And I'll stop there for any questions. If not, I'll go on. The next group of funds that you have there are your special revenue funds, and these are funds for our new council members that actually have a specific purpose for the collections that they're coming from, or the money is coming from a specific place. For instance, victims' rights, and it's a little bit of a unique situation. We do get federal funding for victims' rights, federal and state funding. However, that funding has been declining over the years, and the general fund is subsidizing that fund significantly. And we do track how much we are booking out of the general fund to support that beyond the funding that we catch. And right now, that's at about a negative $1.2 million. Another one, for instance, the Fire Service Fund, it has a fund balance of about $14 million, and that is specifically for the millage that is collected for fire services, that is the county's portion. I'll remind you on that the City of Columbia and the town of Irmo do take their portion to fund their own fire operations. I'll ask if there's any questions related to those. If not, we'll move on to enterprise. These are our funds that are set up like a private business. They should be self-supporting from their funds. The positive news that we have here is our solid waste fund is becoming much more is becoming fairly self-sustaining and is satisfying the deficit that it has had. So we're very pleased to see that. The other is our Broad River, which is actually our entire utility system, which has a significant fund balance, and our airport, which also has a fund balance. And again, those are fee-for-service types of operations. Are there any questions related to that? Yes, sir.
Councilman Weaver. What is Broad River?
Broad River is actually just the title that comes out of our reporting system for our utility system. Right, water and wastewater. With that, and the derivation for that is that this is divided into two sections. One is the Broad River plant, one is the Lower Richland plant, and that's just the title that fit nicely on the chart. Any other questions? So as you see, our total fund balance did grow slightly, and that's always a positive thing. That's a result of a couple of things. We did not expend all of our funding in 2024, and I will say that these are unaudited. We are waiting on the auditor to return our reports back to us, and we expect to have that complete this week. And that will then be presented to council as an audited financial.
Ms. Barry?
Yes, ma'am.
So I wanted to go back to our utilities. You're saying that you're stating that they are self-sufficient at this point.
Yes, ma'am.
So being self-sufficient, are we yielding any profit from there?
With government funding, what I will say is we are increasing our fund balance. Last year, if I recall correctly, it was about a $1 to $2 million increase in the fund balance. Many times that's for several different reasons. We might add more customers than we anticipated. We might not quite expend all of the funds that we had thought. For instance, you may not have all your personnel line items filled. You may not have incurred as much in maintenance, things of that nature. So it just means that your expenditures are less than they were projected to be.
Follow up, if I could.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is with that, when we increase our fund balance, because I'm a business owner, so I think profit. But when we increase our fund balance for that particular entity, are those funds being put back into that program or back into that entity
Yes, ma'am. Keep in mind that each one of these are independent funds. We cannot commingle funds from any
Okay.
one of them. The only one that has the potential for that would be that the general fund from time to time, for instance, subsidizes your victims' rights. But you will not take money out of your enterprise funds with the exception of any cost allocation for the services that the county provides to the utility to actually support other services.
And one final question to that, and that, so with that, do we, for any of these entities, do we have projections or proposed projects that we look to put back into those entities? So, you know, for instance, if there is an increase of $1 to $2 million in utilities, do we just run this balance, or are we looking to reinvest back into those entities?
Yes, ma'am. If you recall, Director Davis actually presented a capital improvement plan and a 10-year plan for the system, and it would involve using all of those funds to either do pay-go projects, which means I'm paying direct cash from my fund balance, or B, to look at what the capacity for bonding would be based on that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just want to follow up on their questions to see if you state something for the record. I too am a business owner. Sometimes the business plan is a little tricky when you're talking about utilities. So just to be clear, Richland County, there's not probably a municipality that profits on utilities. We're not trying to do that. So for our customers out there who are trying to pay their bills, as an enterprise fund, what we're doing is ensuring that we're getting enough money from fees for the upkeep of the system. And so when we are accumulating fund balances, expand other things, it is for the preservation and the sustainability of the system. But this is not providing wireless. This is not a profit enterprise. This is a service enterprise.
That is absolutely correct. Keep in mind that all government entities are service entities, and while they may carry certain fund balances forward, typically those are planned to either substantiate your debt or to do projects, and you will have a capital plan, like I said, which Director Davis presented one that was approved by council. And if anybody has any question on that, you can get with Director Davis or Budget Director Wilkerson, and they'll be happy to walk you through those. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
What's the SRO again?
That's your school resource officers. Any other questions? Okay.
ACA Thomas,
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
we can carry forward.
I wanted to give you a look at some of the outstanding debt for the county. Debt is also divided by fund. You have your general obligation debt, which is that top group there here. This is debt that is backed by the full-fledged power of taxing in the county. So, in other words, it's our debt millage. But also, if we ever decided to change the debt millage or not to have debt millage, we would be responsible for using tax dollars for that. You notice that you have two in there that are libraries, and the libraries does receive taxes, and that's what they're using for backstopping that. So those are a part of our general fund, our general obligation debt as well. The capital projects for the fire has its own millage. So that debt is specific to those funds. The enterprise funds do have debt as well. A portion of the utility systems debt is related to general obligation debt, but it does not count toward the county's total debt because the enterprise system is making those payments, not the general fund. Any questions along that? We do have over to your right-hand side, the Series 2019. That is your IPRB, or your installment purchase revenue bond that was used to purchase the Blythewood property. That is secured, and that is a different type of debt as well. It is not being paid for out of our debt millage, and it is not a part of our 8% debt capacity that is allowed by law. Additionally, your hospitality fund has one bond still outstanding. It only has 2 years remaining on it. It will be paid off in 2026. and that goes back to a 2013 issue. And then lastly is your transportation bond. I will point out with the transportation bond, that is a bond that was issued against the original transportation penny, not the new transportation penny, which we are not yet collecting. The final maturity dates that you have there are the times when those debts will be rolling off and will be paid off. Do I have any questions there?
Quick question, looking at the transportation fund bond, so it says it's on. So looking at the item that you have here that you said was the first penny, so even though we will have finished collecting the funds probably sometime this year, next year, we won't have finished paying off the bond for that till 2028.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I don't believe, let's see, that was a 2021, it would not have the ability to be refunded either, so we could not prepay it without a defeasance. Anybody else? So I wanted to give you a little bit of a comparison on our tax collections over the last 3 years. This is always something that we look at, and it's not an exact science, and I'll try to explain some of these things. So the total tax bill collections, as you can see for this November, are about $5 million less than they were in 2023, but are more than they were in 2022. And a lot of the reason for that is that the Thanksgiving holiday fell so late this year. Last year, following the Thanksgiving holiday, when many of your escrow checks start to come in from your borrowers, they had a whole week after the holiday. This year, we closed on November the 26th and did not open back up until December the 1st. So you had quite a few days that were not available to be collected. And believe me, when you came in on December the 1st, downstairs you could tell it. The treasurer worked overtime that day. We've collected, same thing with Philo. That also is a matter of timing. General fund taxes, however, if you look at it, they are higher. And that's because not all taxes are property taxes. And on our local option sales tax, now keep in mind with our local option sales tax, unlike many other entities, it's completely a rebate to property tax owners. That was at $25.1 million, which is the highest in the last 3 years. So our taxpayers, our homeowners, are getting a lot of relief on their tax bills. Any questions there?
Any questions? Councilman Weaver, did you hear the savings? ACA Thomas?
Especially for you, Councilman. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Director Wilkerson, and she's going to talk about our revenue and expenditures through November.
Good morning, everybody. I am Madison Wilkerson. I'm the Director of Budget and Strategic Management here at the county. I'm going to walk through our budget to actual report through the month of November. So usually our month ends, of course, on the 30th or the 31st, but as far as financially, we usually try to close that out by about the 20th of the following month. So that's why we're looking at November and not December today, since we're only at January 16th. So looking at this, we do apologize for the size and also some of the reporting. We are still working through our reporting in our new system of Workday. As an accountant, I like to see revenues as a credit or with brackets around them. So we have it a few different ways on the slide here, but I'll walk through it shortly. So our overall budget, we're looking at about $223 million. That was approved by council last year. Or in June of 2024. If you'll recall, that was $223 million of actual revenues, and then of course we had some transfers in from some of our other funds to make up the full $231 million that y'all approved in June of 24. Looking at our revenues to date, we do have kind of a bell curve when it comes to our property taxes. As y'all all know, your property taxes are due January 15th of each year. So we certainly, in the months of December and January, see a pretty large influx of our property taxes, but as Lori mentioned a few moments ago, we do have other property taxes that hit through in every month. So that would be like our vehicle taxes, personal property, things like that. Some of our other items, when we kind of go down to like our license and permits, that includes our business licenses, which are due each year around April 30th. So again, you'll see in November months, not necessarily tracking month to month, but we'll see a large influx at least by April 30th. And, some of our other items that are a little bit more, steady in nature would be our magistrate's fines, fees, things like that, medical indigent care. That is also, already we see quarterly payments of that. So that has been tracking as far as we projected at budget time. But overall, through November, we're looking at about $46 million, which is only about 21% of our budget, and we're 41% through the year, the fiscal year. So that's why having that fund balance is so important, certainly during these tougher months like October and November, when our revenues are not tracking with our expenditures. Our expenditures are definitely more consistent month to month, and you'll see that on the next slide. But our revenues, that's just not how it works because we are so heavily funded by property taxes and some of those bell curve type items. So when I move to the next slide, you'll see our expenditures. And so again, referring back to the last one where we were looking at a $46 million inflow, now we're looking at a $150 million outflow. Now again, keep in mind this does include encumbrances, which means that that's our purchase orders. So there are times where certainly with supplies, with big purchases, equipment, things like that, where we actually issue a purchase order. So we have not spent the money yet, but we are, earmarking it for that purpose. So you'll see here we do have actuals and encumbrances on this tab. And again, we're 41% through the fiscal year, so we would expect our expenditures to track in that way. And for the most part, they are. You will see some items like personnel services. We do notice that's a little bit ahead of the fiscal year, but keep in mind we do pay out longevity pay in July. We had our compensation plan increase in October, so there's been things that have happened through the first half of the fiscal year. So again, thankful to the county council for approving that compensation plan for a second year. But I'll pause here and certainly allow for any questions on the revenue and expense report through November.
So, thank you for this information. This is a question and I guess a request. There was a time when you would get like a monthly snapshot of finances that just looked at what were the key categories of expenditures, what was the year-to-date actual versus the budget. There might have been a column of a quick comparison of this time of where we are this year versus the same time last year. And I would love it if we would look at maybe providing that again. I think it's helpful in general, but also as we're rolling towards budget time, just starting to see some of those. It wasn't even a whole page. I think it was a really quick graph, but I would love it if we could look at doing that again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Newton. And certainly ACA Thomas and I with Stacy and others have agree with you 100%. And we're working through that with our IT team to get our reporting, up to speed in Workday. And so I think that we can definitely, that's certainly a goal of ours to so that you can see, where we were at this time last year, where we are this year, what our budget looks like, the proportionate share, all of that. So we appreciate that and certainly hope to get that to you sooner rather than later. Anyone else? All right, thank you. I'll turn it back to ACA Thomas.
Okay, last small graph, or at least for us. As most of you know, the county or all taxing entities by state statute can only issue 8% of their assessed value in bonds. This is a snapshot as of June 30th, 2024. It shows what our assessed value was, what our 8% of assessed value is. It was almost 158 million. The amount of debt that we have applicable to that amount, less the excluded amount, which those are those utility bonds that we were talking about. That leaves our net debt applicable to the limit at 116 million, which leaves us about 41 million. So we've issued about 73.7% of our assessed value. This was the assessed value for your property taxes on your 2023 bills. If you recall, in 2024, we had reassessment, and our assessed value went up significantly by about 12%. That brings about a lot of alternatives relative to financing, because there are two things that we have to look at here. One is what we can issue by debt statute, what the state says we can issue. But as you all recall also, we have debt millage. And if are there any questions related to this?
Quickly, did I understand correctly that bonds related to the sewer are not included in the 8% capacity?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Does this include school bonds? Or
It does not. They have their own millage because they assess millage above and beyond our millage.
all right, so school
It does
debt,
include the library, but not the schools.
school debt not included. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Other questions? Well, with that, because we did see a significant increase in our mill value, and one of our strategic goals is to provide excellent facilities. And if you go to 6.74, it was to look at specifically a judicial center. So after having some conversations with David Cheatwood from First Tryon, we wanted to show you what options might be considered by the policymakers to actually move some of these projects along. Another key issue that we have here is that recently we have received $1 million from the state legislature to begin the process of relocating our emergency operations center. This was done through funding through the Department of Social Services. Not exactly sure why, but we never turned down money. And so this would be money that would specifically earmark us to be able to start to look to make that process move forward. There are a couple of other things we're going to talk about during our capital planning program, but we had to find a place to put this, and this seemed to work. Along with that, there are some other things and improvements that need to be done at Alvin S. Glenn Detention Center. Given all of this information, I've asked David Cheatwood to come from First Tryon Advisors and to talk you all through this. I think many of you have seen Mr. Cheatwood speak with us before on county options and how we might fund projects. But this would just give council some ideas on what could be possible should you choose to want to move forward with some additional capital projects this year along those lines. I have put a few, I'm sorry.
Sorry, ACA Thomas, I guess before we go into that, we do have new council members, and so I want to, if you could, take a brief step back and at least address the capital improvement projects that we have already started, to really just explain that we've identified that funding for those major things. Those are still going on, but now we're looking for next. So if you could just briefly kind of overview that.
Absolutely. Right now at the county, and I don't want to steal Director Peters and Deputy Director Williams' thunder. That's okay. But currently, the county has about $129 million in projects underway. One of those is the Public Safety Complex, which will house the 911 Center, and you'll get an update on that. One is a facility to house voter registration and election and Department of Juvenile Justice. We'll give you an update on that. We've borrowed money also to fund the Family Services Center. All of these projects are at the Columbia Place Mall. If you also remember, we collect 3.5 mils of tax millage every year for capital projects. Those are our maintenance projects, and we have quite a few of those ongoing currently, and you'll get an update on that as well. We have 2 magistrates facilities that are currently under construction. You'll get an update on those as well. And numerous other projects going on around the county. So these are projects above and beyond that. What I want to say is that this is probably the largest building project, or the largest number of building projects the county has had underway in, I know, 6 years. I think the last major construction was the Decker Center that was finished in 2017. So we're addressing some of our long-term needs, but there are still lots of needs that we need to address. And with that, I'm going to turn it over. Let me explain this relationship as well. So most local governments have a financial advisor who advise you on how best to use your funding. The job of a finance office and me and the ACA's role is to make sure that we use our funds to the best ability. There are lots of things that go into that. Number one is what we can do from a legal perspective, which our bond attorneys, Parker Poe, help to advise us on. But the other side of that is how best we can utilize and most efficiently utilize those funds. And that's done by a financial advisor, and those two have to be very specific and very distinct. So the county's financial advisor is First Tryon Advisors, and David Cheatwood is the partner there who advises us. And we are very pleased to have him with us. He's built a model that is specific to Richland County that he will be able to show us dynamic information on what we could potentially do. And if you have questions, he'll be able to even show those on the models. The graphs that you have in your workbook are strictly to tickle your memory after this is over. But if at any point in time you'd like to come in and sit down with us, these are our models. And Mr. Cheatwood has shared those with us, and you can come in and we can sit down and talk about that at any point in time. Are there any questions before I turn it over to David?
I did have one question, and that is pertaining to the $1 million that we received from the state legislators. You said it came out of the social services funds, and I just find it kind of odd that it came out of those funds and we're using it for the emergency service center relocation when we're presently have a project underway for DSS.
I wish I could explain that.
Please make it make sense.
So I can't make it make sense. What I can tell you is we approached the legislature. They did provide the funding. And I think for them, it was a matter of where they wanted to take it from. They told us basically we need to go to DSS. They gave it to them as a pass-through to the county, but it was their choice. So they earmarked it for the EOC, and that's just where they sent it to as a pass-through. But we did not have any hand in that decision.
And as a follow-up, if I may, but when we made the ask was for the EOC.
That's correct. The specific ask was for the Emergency Operations Center. They funded that specific ask. And again, they told us where to go and get it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry.
You may recall when we talk about enterprise funds, we went to this indirect cost allocation.
Yes, sir.
And I remember some of those funds, it was as much as 10, 11, 12%. How did that impact those budgets this year?
Actually, there was really no impact.
Did it cost more for those services to the citizens receiving them?
Well, yes, there is a cost for it, but there was no deficit to those funds based upon the cost allocation. I'm sorry. Also, that is in FY25, not in FY24. So it's in the current fiscal year. So you're just seeing, we haven't started making those transfers. We haven't made any of those transfers yet, no. Any other questions? And with that, I'm going to turn it over to David.
I may just keep it up on the screen if that's all right. Oh, did they already switch it? Okay, no problem. Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much for having me here this morning. As Ms. Thomas said, my name is David Cheatwood. I work at First Tryon Advisors. We're based just up the road in Charlotte. We serve as financial advisor to cities, counties, utility systems, school districts across the state, and we help them with long-term financial capital planning. And then if you have a financing need, we take you through the financing process. I've worked with the county as your financial advisor since for about 7 years now. So looking at all those different bond deals that you've done over the years, we've taken you through that process. Focusing specifically on the long-term financial capital planning, that's where we spend a lot of time. And over the years, as Ms. Thomas mentioned, we've built some models that are specific to Richland County. We're model geeks. We like to dig into the numbers and be able to look at a bunch of different scenarios for you all to make sure administration and you as a council, you're fully informed, have all the information where you're going to make decisions in deciding what to borrow for, how much to borrow, and what the overall impact is on your financials and your tax rate. So specific to a couple of these big projects that Ms. Thomas talked about, Emergency Operations Center, some improvements to the detention facility, and then a new judicial facility or courthouse, we went to our model and we updated a few things with your latest numbers, including, as Ms. Thomas mentioned, y'all had a nice jump in your assessed value that went into effect for tax year 24, fiscal 25. So we wanted to reflect that. That's great. That's going to provide you some flexibility as we will show here in a second. And so I wanted to just really walk you through the math behind the numbers. And so you'll just if you could bear with me for a minute, just to make sure y'all see where I'm coming from the numbers. And then I'll focus on the easier on the eyes charts here. And for all of this, I've employed temporarily my new colleague, Ms. Wilkerson, to help me go through this here. So, Madison, would you, if you go over a little bit more and just kind of blow it up if you could a little bit, because there's a lot of numbers, and I promise I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time. I'd say keep going, and I'll kind of take you, if you can, I'm sorry, can you blow it up even more just to take you through that? And then go back over to the left, to the start of that. One more column. Great. So I'll take you through these numbers kind of left to right, and then again, I'll just focus on the charts here, which are much easier to follow. So let me, before I dive into this, talk about general obligation bonds. That's one of the primary financing mechanisms that you as a county have to issue debt in the state. There's some others. You've employed others, like Ms. Thomas went through. You've issued hospitality bonds. You've issued an installment purchase bond. You've issued utility system bonds. What we'll focus on here primarily are going to be general obligation bonds, and I'll also mention installment purchase bonds again. General obligation bonds, as Ms. Thomas mentioned, those are secured by the full faith, credit, and taxing power of the county. And that taxing power is in the form of debt service millage. The county levies debt service millage separate and apart from your operating millage and some of the other millages that you levy there. The revenues generated from the debt service millage have to go to pay debt service on general obligation bonds. Historically, or at least over the last several years, your debt service millage rate, as y'all know, has been 10 mils. Several years ago, I think you were at 11. You dropped it down a mil to 10, but over the last several years, you've been at 10 mils. So let's talk about what that generates in terms of revenues. Looking at your tax year 24, fiscal year 25, current year, again, you levy 10 mils. Your value of a mill is just under $2.1 million, and that's about a 12% increase over last year. That's tied to your reassessment. Your assessed value went up, therefore your value of a mill went up. So you all levy 10 mills at about $2,066,000 per mill. We are a little bit conservative. We try to be conservative on how much of that you collect. Some of that may be delinquent. You'll get it in maybe over the years, but we want to be a little bit conservative and assume that you just collect 98% of those revenues. So at the 10 mills, you would generate a little over $20.2 million this year. You are then going to use that, or you have to use that to pay debt service on your general obligation bonds. And so when we scroll, for now, maybe ignore the solid waste revenues. There's a very small portion of one of your GO bonds that went to some solid waste projects. You're using solid waste revenues to pay that small portion. It is not a material amount, so I'll gloss over that for now. Right now, in this current year, your total debt service is principal plus interest on your general obligation bonds. that are not supported from any other revenues. So this does not count your GEO transportation sales tax bond, doesn't count your hospitality bond, does not count your utility system bonds. It is just GEO debt that is supported from debt service millage is about 18.4 million. So you're bringing in this year 20.2 million. Your debt service is 18.4 million. And so that generates an annual surplus this year of about $1.9 million. That is not unusual to have a little bit of a surplus in a given year. Normally, when you're setting the millage each year, you're looking obviously at your debt service. That's what's driving it. But you don't want to get too aggressive with that millage rate, because the worst case scenario is you don't collect enough, and therefore you've got to find other funds to fund that shortfall. And so it's pretty typical to generate a little bit of a surplus. And then if you're in the market over the years, you have time to flush out any excess balance that generates over a couple of years. And that's what y'all have done in the past. Speaking of the fund balance, you all do have a fund balance in your debt service fund, not to be confused with your general fund or the other funds that Lori went through. This is in your debt service fund. Again, has to go to pay debt service on general obligation bonds. It is good to maintain a balance in there, just like any fund. It's good to have some cushion in there in case, again, collections don't come in as expected. The amount of that really depends on the amount of your annual debt service. As we go through this, you'll see that I've assumed a minimum of $5 million as a fund balance target. That's a good balance, just looking at your outstanding and what we'll look at proposed debt service going forward. So this year, again, you generate a little bit of a surplus. What you'll see next year and the years after, that surplus grows. And so what that tells us is you have capacity to issue additional debt and stay within your 10 mil levy. And so no impact on your tax rate. You have the ability to issue additional debt for future projects. And I'll start to turn on a couple of projects here as we go through this. There are two limitations when you go to issue general obligation bond debt. The first, as Lori mentioned, is a constitutional limitation. So you all cannot issue more than 8% of your assessed value in non-voter approved general obligation debt. You can have as much voter approved general obligation debt as you want. That's the debt that was approved with the prior penny sales tax and the new one coming up. You have the ability to issue GEO debt there. That doesn't count against your 8% debt limit. Voters approved it. For everything else that's a general obligation bond that's not voter approved, you cannot have more than 8% of your assessed value outstanding. And so that is just a constitutional debt limit that everybody's faced with. And so that's something we're going to keep an eye on, or that we always keep an eye on, and we'll show you how that's impacted. The other limitation is a self-imposed limitation. As a county council, it's how much do you want to levy in debt service millage? And so if you have, you can go as high as you want on the debt service millage. You got to have enough to support the debt as long as you stay within your 8% limit. You can also decide, I want to lower my millage, so we reduce the amount of debt you have, or reduce the amount of debt going forward. So those are the two limitations that we focus on in our model. 8%, that's the constitutional debt limit. Definitely can't go over that unless you get voter approval. And then the other is a council-imposed, self-imposed limitation as to what you want your debt service millage to be. So with all that as some background here, I wanted to turn on a couple of projects, and we'll focus on, before I turn these on, just to show you the charts we're looking at here. The first is the fund balance in your debt service fund. And again, I probably should have cut this off, because ignore that out there. Obviously, it's not going to grow to that amount. If you don't need it, you would reduce your millage. So really focus on here, and we can go back to the numbers, but I'm trying to maintain a minimum of $5 million in your debt service fund balance. The better chart that we'll focus on is this one over here. This yellow line, those are the revenues that I went through. That's your 10 mills. That's your value of a mill at a little over $2 million. And we are assuming going forward, your value of a mill, your assessed value, increases by 2% per year. So that's why it's gradually going up. Those are your revenues available to pay GEO debt service. These bars are your existing GEO debt service that is supported by debt service millage. You will see a nice picture here where in this year, 25, next year, you have a very nice step down. Your total debt service goes down by about $3.5 million. Generates capacity right there for new debt. Steps down a little bit thereafter. It's pretty flat and steps down and from 34 to 35. That existing debt picture is very important when we look at your capacity, because we have to know, again, do we have a cliff coming up that where we can, if you wait an extra year to issue this bond, it won't have any sort of tax impact, things like that. So that's our starting point. This is your existing debt supported by your debt service millage. These are your revenues if you keep your millage at 10 mils. So let me start with the first project here, the Emergency Operations Center, Detention Center improvements, and a little bit of design money for the new courthouse. $75 million, just a plug figure estimate there, illustrative purposes here. If you issued $75 million, you'll see a couple of these charts start to populate here. $75 million, that would be issued under your 8% debt limit, supported by debt service millage. I've assumed a 20-year repayment term. Most of your debt is repaid over 20 years. You can go 30 years. I actually think you can go 40 years. Most don't go past 30 years, but your debt is generally in that 20, some of your utility debt is 30 years. That's my assumption. I've assumed a current market rate, which would be about 3.75% on that, assuming you did that this year. You issued $75 million this year. So what you're going to see is some new populated chart here. I think we lost it there. There we go. So, yeah. Yeah, give me, and if you want, Madison, you can either close it out and open it back up. Either way might, or just, you want to turn it on again, see if that, there you go. So we scroll over. So our blue columns, existing debt. The orange is the $75 million over 20 years. So now it's stacked on top of the existing debt. So you'll see a couple things. One, you'll see it goes over our revenues available, our 10 mils. I have not adjusted the millage. 10 mils, it goes over that in 2026. That's by design, because y'all have a little bit more in your debt service fund balance than you need. So I'm flushing out a little bit to get down to that $5 million target. And then from there on out, you'll see that our revenues more than support the debt service associated with $75 million. So the punchline from just turning on this scenario is the county can issue $75 million in debt and have no impact on your debt service millage, the 10 mils that's outstanding, that you currently levy. So again, if the directive is let's stay at 10 mils for now, you can do $75 million. Let's do that other check with the constitutional debt limit. And so when we scroll down, Madison, down into the left, Ms. Thomas went through your 8% debt limit from last year. That's grown. It was about $45 million last year. That's grown this year because A, your assessed value went up by over 12%, and B, you paid down a pretty significant amount of principal on your debt this year. And so you have, or you will this spring, you'll have close to about $77 million of a debt limit outstanding, of capacity within your debt limit. So when I stack this new 75 million on, it's hard to see with the on the screen here, you only have about $1.5 million of capacity starting in spring of 25 if you issued this debt. That's very tight, admittedly. Y'all, your total debt limit's close to 200 million, and now we're down to $1.5 million of capacity. If that was a long-term picture for a county of your size, I would say we don't want to go there. You want to have a little bit more capacity to address if you've got an economic development opportunity, if we have a natural disaster and you need to issue debt to raise money before you get FEMA reimbursement, et cetera, et cetera. So in isolation, that's too small for a county of your size. However, you fast forward just 1 year and you get a good bit of that right back for two reasons. One, we've assumed your assessed value grows a little, 2%. More importantly, you pay down another significant chunk of debt in 2026. So you're going to be back to, Madison, if you hover your cursor over that white part, what does that say? $22 million in 2026. So you're tight for 25, but you get it right back in 26, and then you'll see it then starts to grow each year thereafter. So again, council decision if you wanted to kind of bump up against that, but you can. So you got the constitutional capacity to do it. You have the 10 mil capacity to do it. So that's let me pause on that one and maybe anything else I've been talking about how our model works. But any questions so far before I get to the bigger project here? Yes, sir.
On the 8% debt limit, is that, oh, thank you, Jason. Is that recalculated, the 8% debt limit every year or only on 5-year reassessments?
Every year.
Every year?
Every year, yeah. So
Okay.
each year, obviously you tend to see the bigger jumps every 5 years, but each year your assessed value has grown, and it's grown on average about 2%, which is why that's our assumption going forward. And so that's just with new development, redevelopment that's happening that gets on the tax rolls. So it is every year.
Okay, and one more question. You said the target was 5 million, I believe, on the debt service fund. What is in there now?
In there now, you're closer to, at the end of last year, you were about 8 million. Which again is not, it's not unusual to have a balance. It's very typical, I should say, to have a balance in your debt service fund. Once it starts to get too high, you want to bring that down to a more reasonable level or lower your, if it keeps going up, that's saying you don't need as much debt service millage because your debt's going down, or your value of the mill's going up. But what most do is when it starts going up, big counties like you all, you're always going to have projects. So you don't want to have a whipsaw effect where you go, all right, well, we don't need it this year. Let's go down to 9, but then we're going to need it next year. Let's go back up to 10. Most will say, okay, for a year, I'll increase the balance a little bit, knowing I have another project, another borrowing next year, and I don't want to have this kind of whipsaw effect on my millage rate.
Thank you.
Sure.
And just to clarify, the debt millage decision is the county auditor's decision. So the county auditor sets the debt millage. So we have to make sure we work with him, because if he looks at this and doesn't see that in his perspective, the county needs those funds to pay debt service, then he can determine that the millage will be lowered to the value that he chooses to lower it.
That's really good point, Mr. Brown. Thanks for clarifying that. You're normally working in conjunction with your auditors, say, here's what we have coming up. This is what we think. What do you think? And then, but yes, your auditor is the one that is in charge of setting your millage, but they're looking at this same picture.
Thank you. Sorry, I was writing a note. So yes, the auditor sets the millage. Are we also saying the auditor sets the debt millage rate, or that's council that sets the debt millage rate while the auditor sets the value of the mill?
I think it's I think it's you're working in conjunction. So they're looking at the same numbers that we're looking at, and therefore that y'all are looking at. It's rare to have a disagreement with your auditor. No, I think it should be this instead of that. And so when you all, if you decide to move forward with another bond, we would look at this and say, all right, we show you can do it within 10 mils, then go to your auditor and say, basically, do you agree? And so everybody's ideally on the same page as to what your debt service millage needs to be. Or if you do another borrowing that requires a millage increase, you're saying, here's what I see it at. Auditor, do you agree? And tell me if I will note too, each county in their interactions with auditors can be different, so I'll defer to y'all.
Can I maybe say a little more about my question? So I hear that and hear the partnership, but let's pick something different. And I won't name a millage agency because I don't want anybody to worry, even in a hypothetical example. But we have millage agencies where council can decide. We have like minimum obligations, but council can decide this agency gets this many mills, this agency gets that many mills. That decision, as long as we meet state minimums, is wholly at the discretion of council what that millage rate is for that agency. And so I'm just trying to do a parallel or a distinction with debt millage, and it sounds like it is distinct from those other agencies.
Debt millage is specific in itself. Keep in mind that with the operating millage for any agency, there are 2 limits that the auditor gives them. That is what their no mill increase is and what their cap is. And those numbers are based on his best estimates. The number, if you recall, you actually don't get your millage ordinance until October. And that's because those numbers are still in flux until the point where where all of the assessor's work is done and the auditor can issue his tax bills. The debt service then is adjusted based on what you have to have for every agency. It's not just the county, but also for the school districts, things of that nature, to satisfy their debt that they have issued to that point. You know, we sit down and we talk with the auditor about what we believe the value of a mill is going to be when we come to you, and we let him come and tell you what he believes it's going to be. And then once all of that calculation is done, you may go into it saying, okay, I need 10 mills to satisfy my debt service. When it gets down to it, it may be 9.5. But you, as David said, you really don't want to have those kind of changes, because what that does is it sets you up to be able to do the next financing that's necessary to be able to fund your projects. So we do have these calculations. Every time we do something, we show him the models. We say, this is what we're planning. And as a matter of fact, this year with our debt service, we went and said, we believe that this would be some priorities council is looking at. So he chose to leave our debt millage where it was.
Any other questions on the numbers behind, or maybe how that first borrowing is layered in? Okay.
Just for make sure I'm clear, we list out in that I guess chart, we say Emergency Operations Center, Alvinus Glen, and Design. But regardless of that description, the amount and charts are still the same. You're just plugging that in, right?
That's right, just to show you.
This is still what we have available, regardless of what's in that description.
That is a good way to look at it. I could have just said capacity,
Right.
75 million. But yes, if those are the projects, and the way your bond ordinances are typically drafted, they give you flexibility to, it may mention a couple of these, but it would say any other county improvements too. So you have flexibility in how you spend those funds, of course. But yes, these are just to say if you spent those funds on these projects. So the next, obviously big number here, a new judicial facility courthouse. We've plugged in $200 million. Now, yep, and we'll show a couple things here. One thing I want to note, Madison, if you could just for a second, change that IPRB to GO, and then change the referendum to 8%. So I want to show something here. So a couple things quickly. Looking at this same chart, these orange bars are now a lot higher because we're issuing $200 million. I've assumed you repay that over a 30-year term instead of a 20-year term like I was assuming for the $75 million. Again, you are legally able to go up to 30 years. In this case, it makes a lot of sense to go 30 years. One, because it's a big number. Two, you want citizens over a 30-year time frame to pay it because the useful life of this is well over 30 years. So perfectly acceptable to do a 30-year financing for something like that, a big project like that. What you'll see is your 10 mills, your revenues, that yellow line, they are below our aggregate debt service when that turns on. If we scroll, because our revenues are not sufficient to support our debt, if we scroll over this way, Madison, we've got our fund balance. It doesn't even show it, but it goes away. You know, we'll draw on fund balance for a year or two, but by 2028, you don't have any money incoming or built up to pay that. And then the other thing, your 8% capacity, you blow through that. So you cannot do a $200 million GO bond under your 8% debt limit. So then we look at other options. One, again, you can do it with a referendum because, again, voter approval, there is no limit on how much you can do there. The other option is called an installment purchase revenue bond. And with an installment purchase revenue bond, the county has one outstanding from 2019. So you've done this before. Cities and counties are able to do this structure in the state. We work with Greenville County. They are selling installment purchase revenue bonds literally today as I'm talking here. And so it's a very commonly accepted structure. The difference with an installment purchase revenue bond versus a GO, you do not pledge your taxing power. Actually, you don't pledge any revenue. Instead, you are pledging an asset as collateral, typically the asset you're financing. So you would pledge the courthouse as collateral for that. So the bondholders, the lenders, if you ever didn't pay, they could come in and basically take your courthouse. So that's the teeth behind that structure. That's why it still gets a very good credit rating. It's one notch below your general obligation bond rating. So very high credit rating, good interest rate, commonly accepted structure. The big benefit is it does not account against your 8% debt limit. And so you'll see when we turn that to IPRB, I go back over to my 8% debt limit chart, and we're good. What you typically do is reserve your annual debt service on an IPRB. You make sure you reserve that in your 8% debt limit, but that's only about $10 million per year, just in case you had to go and issue a GO bond to pay it back, or if you go and issue a GO bond to pay it back, which I'll talk about here in a second. So 8% capacity, you're good because it doesn't count against it. And then, but we go up to the revenue stream, and that problem is not solved. And so we're looking at that. And if we scroll over a little bit more, Madison, so again, we've got to solve this problem. So the way to solve that problem, the only way to solve that problem, if you wanted to pay it from debt service millage, is to increase your millage rate. So what we've done here, we've assumed that you issue this debt in 2027, the $200 million. You start to repay it in 28. So 28 is when we need the revenues coming in to pay that higher debt service. So in your tax year 27, and those revenues would be coming in January of 28, we increase your millage rate by 2 mils to 12 mils. And so what we'll then find is a 2 mil increase in tax year 27, fiscal 28. We are now, again, this is intentional by design because I'm flushing out a little bit of balance in there. Starting in 27, 28, my yellow line matches my existing and proposed debt service. So that's my 75 million plus the 200 million would require a 2 mil increase in your fiscal year 28, so fall of 27, in order to cover that debt over a 30-year time frame. Of course, if you said, hey, let's do that over a 20-year time frame, you can. It's going to be less expensive overall because you're not paying interest for as long of a period, but your annual payments are going to be higher, so it would require a higher millage increase to do that. So that's where I've started with what is the lowest millage increase, the lowest tax impact that we could have in order to fund 275 million of projects over the next few years, and that's a 2 mil increase. And again, part of that, you're getting the benefit of your existing debt stepping down. You're getting the benefit of your value of a mill going up 2% per year. So again, that's how you could fit that in. There's some nuances to this installment purchase revenue bond. I won't go too far into the weeds on that, but as I mentioned at the outset, you have to use debt service millage to pay general obligation bond debt service. So a question you may have would be, well, how do I use debt service millage to pay installment purchase revenue bond debt service? The way to do that, and the way everybody in the state does that, you issue a general obligation bond each year that has a 6-month or 1-year maturity in the amount of the debt service that's due in that year. So it replenishes every single year. So if your debt service due on this installment purchase revenue bond for fiscal year 28 is $10 million, well, then you go and issue a $10 million general obligation bond. So you can go point to the auditor, see, auditor, I have a GO bond for $10 million. That's why I need this additional 2 mils. And he says, great, I see it. Your debt service, that GO bond pays off 6 or 8 months later, and then you do the same thing every year. So that's the legal mechanism to use debt service millage to pay off installment purchase revenue bond debt. I know that's complicated. Sorry to get into the weeds, but I wanted to flag that a little bit. The punchline of all of this, though, is that's a legal way to do that. 2 mil increase in fiscal year 28 to fund that $200 million project. No increase needed to do $75 million this year if you wanted to. It's a lot of detail info. I know I've probably gone over, but any questions?
Thank you so much. We have one question, if we could, Ms. We have 2 questions. So we are slightly behind schedule, but I want to leave you all time to ask a few questions. The next staff presentation is the capital projects that we can look at that ties also into this funding. Ms. Barron and Councilman Branham.
Thank you. I just for anybody who may be watching or will watch later, I think the most important thing for citizens to know and to hear you say is when we talk about a millage increase, how does that impact the citizens of Richland County? I think that's what's important. We understand for the most part where you're coming from in that, but at the end of the day, people are going to want to know, how does this impact their homes?
Right. So I'll do some mental math. Oh, you got it? Okay.
So for a owner-occupied property, per $100,000 value, a mill is $4. So 2 mills is $8. So it would be less than $1 a month per 100,000. So if I have a $300,000 home, it would be $24. So basically $2 a month.
And I also, because Ms. Barron, you mentioned for the people at home or may not watch this, I also want to say this is options of funding. It is our strategic planning session. We are not making any decisions about increasing any millage. If that happens, there will be ample notice that is discussed in a public setting in council chambers. And so these are all scenarios of what we could do, what we might do, but by no means is council saying today that we are talking about a millage increase. Thank you.
Yep. I would also point out that any change or any bond ordinance or any of those things requires a public hearing. And we could also do roadshows and things of that nature to explain the options.
Thank you, and I appreciate the clarity coming from the chair as well. But I think that anytime when we talk about options or proposals, it's enough for us to make sure that we know we understand what it is that we're doing, and as we go through this process, it's important that citizens also understand the details in which we have to take and the steps that we have to take in order to get to where we're going, and to be thoughtful and mindful of them throughout this process. Thank you.
Mr. Chewood, thank you very much. You going to be here in the next hour?
I'm going to stick around.
Okay, good. I was just going to highlight, as you transitioned from the initial conversation about the Emergency Operations Center to the courthouse, you didn't turn off the 75 million, potential borrowing there. You just added another 200 million to it when we started talking about the potential for the courthouse. So that was the conversation was like in a theorized scenario where we were doing both things, attacking a full $275 million in borrowing. I'll just save anything else for the next session. Thanks.
One other thing that I would point out, if we could turn this back on for just 1 second. Or actually, I can say this. The 2 mills is only required for 7 years. In 2034, we start paying off a lot of the library bonds and the other things, so your capacity increases. So your millage rate at that point would have an opportunity to come back down.
Yeah, you see it out here. You start to have some capacity there now. You can lower it. You may have other projects that pop up too over that time frame that would fill that. But yeah, that's where the next opportunity would be.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilman Brandon, for pointing that out, because you're right. We did switch to the courthouse, but didn't acknowledge that these numbers are looking at all of that. So thank you. All right, Administrator Brown.
Thank you. The next session is our capital improvement session. We're going to have Eric Williams who's going to come forth and present information on capital improvements. Eric, if you can just take a moment for our new council members and some of our current ones to introduce yourself, your title, and walk us through it.
Good morning. My name is Eric Williams. I'm the Deputy Director of Operational Services. I'm accompanied today by Zach Kay. He's our Assistant Director of Operational Services. He handles our facility sides, facilities and maintenance. And Mr. Bill Peters, who's our current director. I'm going a little off script here. Mr. Peters retires at the end of the month, so I'd like to give him some recognition for 20 years of service, 20 years plus of service with the county. I know that you hate I'm doing this, but I have to. All right, we really appreciate you. All right, the clicker, you don't mind. Before I get started, as far as our capital improvements or our capital project updates, I want to give an overview of the services provided by operational services. So we provide custodial services, maintenance services, both grounds and building maintenance services for all of the facilities for the Richland County. We provide printing and mail operations for multiple departments through our central services division. We handle all renovation and small project management, such as carpet replacement, building new offices, small projects that can be handled by our staff. Then we have our capital project management team, which I head up. So we handle a lot. I like to give our staff a shout out whenever I have the opportunity to, because we do have a lot of responsibilities in the county. My next slide here on the screen here are Richland County strategic initiatives or goals. Our department, as far as the services that we provide, support every one of these goals, but there are three in particular that we feel drive, and they actually align and drive the mission of operational services. Okay. Those three are plan for growth through inclusive and equitable infrastructure. As you know, we handle or we manage all of the capital projects as far as construction, renovation, achieve positive public engagement. We feel that when staff and residents of Richland County come to our properties, they should come to a place where they feel comfortable and they feel they'll get served in a professional manner. I think that starts with when they first drive up and see our facilities, and once they come inside, they see the facilities inside also. Lastly, they're establish operational excellence. In order for our staff to conduct business and the residents of Richland County to conduct business, they have to have a place where they can conduct business in a proper manner. We feel that it's our responsibility to make sure that our facilities are in working order and they meet the needs of both staff and the residents of Richland County. All right. On your next page there in your workbook, you have a chart there. It's kind of color-coded. There's a couple of columns here, as you can see. The first column there is the description and location of our projects. The second column is our project description. There's a status update there, percent completion, our budget, the project start date, projected estimated completion date, and then the contractor that we have contracted with to handle those projects. Instead of going through these charts, I know it's a lot of information there. I've decided to give you some information updates on our most pertinent or larger projects. Okay, and I think this chart is also contained on the next page there. So this is just a continuation of the first chart, as you can see. As ACA Thomas mentioned earlier, we currently manage about $129 million worth of projects for the county. These are our capital projects. That number excludes the projects that we are doing out at Alvin's Glen, which you'll see on the next slide. But just in capital projects, renovations, new buildings, new structures, it's $129,142,463. Okay, and that's all managed by a team of 4 capital project managers, including myself. Okay. Now, as far as Alvin's Glen, on the screen that you see there, a couple of these projects that are on the screen were completed in the last quarter. I included those in this number because they recently were completed in December. The projects at Alvin's Glen total about $19,432,019. Again, those are current projects. That doesn't include any improvements that we have done before. That's just current projects and ones that recently completed in December. Okay. Any questions on any of those charts? '24, yes, ma'am. We have 2 housing dorms that were completed December 24th. It was really close to Christmas that were just completed. All right. If there are no questions, we'll get into the updates. So our first, and I think ACA Thomas mentioned this also, our public safety complex. There was a budgeted amount of $42,389,948. The scope of this project was the construction of a 911 call center or emergency operations center. Our current status, the interior finishes are being completed, the exterior work is ongoing, and MEP is our mechanical, electrical, and plumbing installations are currently being installed. Estimated completion date of this is June 30th of 2025. So we hope to see this project done very soon. Okay. Next larger project that we have going on is our Family Services Center. Again, a budget of $47,741,632. The scope of this project was the renovation of the old Dillard's, or the first floor of the old Dillard's building at the mall, for relocation of the state agencies, South Carolina Department of Social Services and South Carolina Department of Health. We're currently in demolition stage. This actually just started last month as far as the demolition there. Estimated completion date of this is December of next year. So we should have a family services center up and running by December of next year. And that's a elevation of the exterior of the family services center, what we hope it will look like once upon completion of construction. Next project to give you an update on is the Department of Juvenile Justice and Voter Registration and Elections. This budget has a budget of $13,173,826. The scope of this was the renovation of the second floor of the Dillard's building for the relocation of the Department of Juvenile Justice and our voter registration department. Okay. The construction is actually in the framing and drywall stage. Estimated completion date of this is September 30th of 2025 this year also. So we should see some progress, or we should see these projects wrap up by the end of the year.
Just question, with it being estimated completion of September of this year, do we anticipate when full occupancy is, meaning when will voter registration folks be able to actually be in it? Is that September as well, or is that a later date?
That is the date that's represented on the screen is actually the end of construction. We will have approvals through our county as far as the CO or occupancy, certificate of occupancy for that. And then, of course, there's a process of moving staff for voters registration into that space.
How long does, I guess, that typically usually take?
We're I would say a couple of months,
Okay.
Based on, it would be logistics based on what voters registration would want to do at that time, as far as moving and availability of staff and maybe hiring a company as far as doing that move, that process.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, one of our newer projects, the Upper Ballantyne Fire Station, is a budget of $6 million. The scope of this project is design and build a new fire station in Upper Ballantyne, or the Irmo area. Currently working with Becker Morgan Architects to finalize the design. We hired them as our design firm. Estimated completion of this, as far as the project and construction, would be July of 2027. We anticipate that design will be done in the next couple of months, as far as we've been working with their staff really heavily as far as getting this design done, as far as site preparation and actual construction of the building. We're hoping that will be done hopefully by summer of this year as far as the design, so we'll have a design to actually work on and then present to you all. Olympia Bluff Road Magistrate and Sheriff Substation, budget of $4,468,440. Scope of this project is to construct a new magistrate office and sheriff substation. Currently working with GMK Associates to finalize the design. There is a preliminary design, but they are working on parking, stormwater issues, and actual interior design at this time. Estimated completion date, as you can see there on the screen, is to be determined. Okay. We're waiting on that final design, then we can come up with an estimated construction completion date. All right. Other one is the Pontiac Clemson Road Magistrate Office. Again, a budget of $2,511,860. The scope is, again, to construct a new magistrate office. Again, currently working with GMK. They're our design firm on both of these magistrate office. Again, estimated completion date is to be determined. Again, we are working on design of the structure and site preparation. All right, that's a couple of our ongoing projects, our completed projects, and these are things that the project management team and myself are really proud of. We've gotten a lot of stuff buttoned up and finished up this year, so we're really proud of a lot of these completed projects. The 2020 Hampton elevators, I'm pretty sure that everybody here has ridden the new elevators. It was a tough project. I know that we all didn't get to see the work that went into it. We know that they were closed off for a while, and then all of a sudden they opened up. They were bright and new. That was a lot of work put into that by our staff. The scope of this was to renovate and modernize all the elevators in both buildings. Please skip this. This is an error here. It says interior finishes are being completed. That actually was completed. And our last bolt, or our last maintenance issue that we had as far as the new elevators, was completed actually on December 24th, so right before Christmas. So all the elevators are fully functional and up and running. Okay. Thank you. We hope to do a lot of other projects that are visual, that will actually have an impact immediately that you can see. This project here that's on the screen is the 2020 HVAC replacement or upgrade. This is a project that's a little bit more that's a little bit more less visible. But at the same time, I hope everybody can feel that there's a difference in the building as far as HVAC and heat. So the budget was $3,797,100. It was to replace the chillers, cooling towers, air handlers, and the energy recovery units at 2020 Hampton Street. The completion date actually was just 2 days ago, January 14, 2025. We got everything buttoned up. There are all new air handlers in. There should be plenty of airflow in the buildings. We do get a lot of complaints about everybody being cold, but that's because the thermostats are turned down. Turn your thermostats up. I have to say that. Please communicate that to your staff, okay? We have plenty of HVAC and heat, I promise, okay? All right, 2020 Hampton and judicial exterior lighting. Smaller project, but something that we want to get done. The budget was $23,000. This is install color changing exterior building lighting for lighting effects for holidays and special events, et cetera. We wanted to get this done. It's something that we see a lot of buildings or public buildings that do. They light their building based on holidays, special events that may be occurring there. We wanted that to be something that we could do also at Richland County. The completion date was actually November 8th. It was actually right before Veterans Day. And I think everybody could see that we lit up our judicial center and administration complex in green. These lights do have the ability to change red, white, and blue. They can flash. There's a lot of capabilities. We're still working out a couple of bugs with them, but they do work.
And I want to just commend Administrator Brown for making sure this is a small, in budget or task, but it really, I think, has meant a lot, especially in our community where military and veterans are a large part of our population, and so many of us have family and relatives. And so to be able to do this on Veterans Day, I think really shows that the county is in alignment with who our residents are, and want to acknowledge that. So thank you.
Alvarez Lynn Detention Center, we decided to take this and make it a separate kind of presentation as far as ongoing projects and completed projects there. I know that the county, this is part of the county, but it's kind of its own world at Alvarez Lynn. I'm pretty sure Director Harvey would agree with me there. We've made a lot of leeway there as far as progress at Alvarez Glen. Current project that's going on, we have the security camera system. There's a budget of $598,652. The scope of this is to design a new camera security and communication system. The project is basically in the final phase as far as design with Mosley Architects. They work closely with my team and the staff at Alvarez Glen as far as getting that design finalized. We have an estimated completion date at the end of this month that we will have a final design for that. Okay. Once we get a final design, we will try to solicit for a contractor that can actually install this at the Alvarez Glen. This will greatly improve the security at the detention center. Alvarez Glen Attorney Visitation Center. If anybody's been there lately, you know at the front of the building there's a lot of construction going on. This is that project that you probably see when you pull up to the building. There's a budget of $4,204,000. The scope is the renovation of our Tango building to provide a new attorney visitation center. Okay, this is going to be really nice once it's finished. We've seen the designs. We've kind of picked out all the finishes. It's going to be a really nice place. So we hope that everybody can visit it once it's been completed. The interior finishes are being completed. Exterior work is ongoing. Again, our mechanical, electrical, and plumbing installations are ongoing there. And there's a kind of a progress picture for you. Estimated completion date on this is really soon, as you can see, January 31st of the 31st of this month. Okay. Again, that will depend on inspections and everything passing and final approvals. Alvarez Glen employee parking security fence. Again, if you've been out to the detention center lately, you'll notice that there's a new security fence. This was to provide a secure area for employees to park. Instead of it just being a wide open parking area. The budget for this was $248,220. Again, provide security fencing for employee area. It's in awaiting installation of razor wire tiebacks and electric gate controls. As you can see, the estimated completion date was January 15th. All of that stuff has been installed, and this project has been completed. So please forgive the date there. Alvarez Glen Detention Center housing unit renovations. If you look back to the chart, I think it was on page 5 or page 6 there, that gave you the list of the projects there. Two of those projects are included They were just wrapped up, like I said, in December of last year. 2 of those projects that are on that chart are included in this number here. So there's a combined budget. So there's 12 total renovations that we're going to complete there. We have 5 of them left. We have 4 of them currently in construction that will be finished by April of this year. Then we have one last one after that we will contract with the contractor to finish renovating. Combined budget for all 12 is $10,057,332. The scope is to renovate and update the housing units. Again, we're awaiting renovation of the last 5 housing units, and our estimated completion date is around May 30th of 2025. Okay. We have, I think, 3 smaller housing units that should go fairly quickly. We're hoping that the contract that we've contracted with gets those done so we can move them on to the 5th and final housing unit, and we can get that done also. All right. A couple of update pictures. All right, bless you. Future projects. Facilities master plan. This is one of our strategic initiatives to compose a facilities master plan. During the last couple of months, we've actually had conversations with Brightly, who's a software company, but also does facilities assessments and facilities master plan. They are on our Sourcewell contract, so we can procure with them. We've actually been in contact with them a lot as far as going back and make sure that they meet the needs of the county and they can get us a truly living facilities master plan that will work for us. The budget that we have for this is $500,000. The scope is a facility assessment and software acquisition from Brightly Solutions in order to create facilities master plan, along with predictive maintenance forecasts. So we have reviewed the proposal from Brightly Solutions and awaiting review and approval from council in March of 2025. So we have drafted a council briefing document that will go before committee, I think, on February 4th, and it will come before full council in March. Estimated time of completion for this project, and this is all facility assessments and having a working master plan, would be December of this year, okay, if approved. Proposed detention building, okay. And in your workbook, there is a clerical error on my part. This budget number should read $40,233,119.06. I think in the book it's $10 million, so if you can correct that. So it's $40,233,119.06. And we were very, very, very particular on that as far as the 6 cents for some reason. Scope, it says to build a 3-story, 288-bed detention building on the current site. Okay, so this would not be building a new detention center. This would be adding a 3-story building that would house 288 or have a 288-bed capacity on the current site. Preliminary cost proposal was given to us by Mosley Architects. The estimated time for design that would be, as far as designing the building and building it, would be 3 years. And that's if that's something that council and administration would want to do. Again, the budget would be about $40 million. But it would greatly improve the capacity of the detention center as far as housing detainees. Okay. All right, proposed emergency operations center. I think ACA Thomas hit on this earlier. The budget for construction, I think, would be about $36 million for construction. That would not include design, but $36 million to build it. Scope would be to build an emergency operations center to house all emergency medical and emergency services staff and all emergency vehicles, approximately about 70,000 square feet. Currently working to identify location and update cost proposal for design and construction. I think ACA Thomas mentioned we had that $1 million that was given to us from state legislature. Estimated time for design and construction, again, about 3 years. So if that's something we want to pursue, it'd be about 3 years before we'd have that up and running.
And then I want to make sure, just for our new members and just a refresher for folks, and this may be you, Director Williams, or ACA Thomas, whoever wants to answer, but just making sure that we clearly state the difference between our public safety building and our emergency operations center, so folks can understand the difference of those two, because oftentimes emergency and public safety go hand, but there are 2 very distinct, different buildings and uses.
Yes, so our public safety complex is where the 911 center will be housed. That is specifically for 911 dispatch. Probation, pardon, and parole will occupy a small portion of it, and the sheriff will have some administrative staff there that will be managing the 911 center. So that's what will be in the facility that is in the lower level of the Burlington at Columbia Place Mall. The Emergency Operations Center, can you go to the next slide? I think this will give you, well, go one more, please.
There we go.
In case you haven't visited, and for some of our newer council members, we encourage you to go and visit. The current Emergency Operations Center is in the basement of our parking garage at 2020 Hampton. It's about 70,000 square feet, and you run 3 shifts out of there, and it's also all of the parking for all of our ambulances and emergency vehicles. The other thing is, if we were to have a disaster, that's where all of you would have to go and report to sit and be a part of the disaster management. It's not designed appropriately to handle that. And we have actually received citing from Homeland that says that we really needed to address this. So we believe this is something that that we would hope that council would see as a priority as they're working through their policy this year.
And emergency operations is Director Byrd. I know folks deal with Director Byrd. It is when we have hurricanes or these weather events, and it's also where we have our amazing meteorologist that gives us all the real-time reports. Thank you.
If you go back one, that sort of shows. Yeah. Thank you.
And I'll go back a slide. So it is located in the garage basement of 2020 Hampton Street. The ventilation does not support appropriate ventilation there. We have done everything we can to make sure the building is up and running. Inadequate parking in the public parking lot, as you can see in the picture there to the right. Our ambulance is parked basically inside of our public parking lot, our lower parking lot. EOC currently needs charging stations down there for the ambulances as they need. It's just outdated. The building is outdated. It's functional but outdated. We currently need to get charging ports down there in the parking lot, lower parking lot for our ambulances there. Going back to this one, again, a growing call for volume for emergency services. So as Richland County grows, of course, you know, emergency calls grow. We need to be able to respond appropriately and have a facility that will allow our staff to respond appropriately. All right, any questions, further questions?
Ms. Barron, did you have your hand?
Yes,
Okay.
I did. Thank you. So with the $36 million, is that amount including the purchase of the land that would go along with that?
I want to steal your spot. You're doing such a good job. So that's really just for the construction, the identifying of the property or the land. If the council chose to do that, would be a separate pot. There are funds that, you know, at the appropriate time we can talk about where you have from the sales of other properties that could be utilized, but all that will be a decision that this council would be a part of deciding.
Thank you.
Wish?
Thank you. Just a quick question with our facilities. Does Richland County put the total portion of that, or do some of the other state agencies also contribute to that?
As far as the facilities, the utilities, and the space, for instance, your maintenance, your utility bills, and all of the maintenance of the facility, the county does manage and is required to do that by state statute for these organizations. As we work through with our state agencies as they're moving to the new facilities, we will be working with these agencies to better define what the responsibilities are. There will be actually a standard agreement with them that defines what maintenance is and what the responsibility of the organization is, because many times maintenance is not what happens because someone is not responsible with the use of the facility.
Thank you. And then one additional question is our magistrate's office, is that still coming out of their budget?
Yes, ma'am. That was money that was actually set aside for those buildings, and currently they're still within budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't see any other hands raised, but I did want to thank Director Williams for this update. And then the one thing I didn't hear, I guess, would be a look at our administration buildings. as a whole, and the thoughts on updates there, and if there's been any thoughts.
So currently we are working as far as a lot of updates. There's a, I won't say a plan. There's a plan, sort of a plan to address a lot of things at 2020 and 2000. Again, I mentioned earlier doing a lot more visible projects, painting, lighting, things that citizens, anybody that walks into our buildings can see. Our building, as far as space management, we have had talks about space management as far as our building also. We've upgraded the HVAC, we've upgraded the elevators. So now we're looking at office space management, we're looking at lighting, we're looking at painting, we're looking at if we can maybe move departments into other areas or expand those areas, renovate those areas so that they will have spaces that will address their needs.
Okay, I'm gonna say one more thing, then I'm gonna let Ms. Newton go. When looking at that, I would also maybe suggest landscaping,
Yes.
if that's on the list. And then if there's, I know you mentioned that study coming up. I don't know, will they look at ways that we can possibly introduce solar into any of our buildings, if that is a possibility at all?
That would be a separate study that would be done. It'd be an energy study that we would need. So that would be a separate study outside of the facilities master plan.
Okay.
With the facilities master plan, I will address that. What they will do is they will go through and assess every single facility that the county has that we identify for them. They will look at mechanical equipment. They'll look at the carpeting on the floor, and they will give us an assessment on that. Once that is all plugged into the software, it actually gives us a risk factor that tells us when these items need to be replaced, or if they're in imminent danger of failing, such as a HVAC unit. So it gives us an overview, kind of a physical for every facility that we have, and we use that information to provide preventative maintenance or provide updates as far as maybe larger capital projects, as far as like an HVAC replacement project that we may need to do in the future.
Thank you. Councilwoman Newton?
Thank you. And you addressed part of my question, which was going to be about the facilities master plan. So first, if my notes that I wrote down are correct, you would be looking at approval in March, and then between March and December, they complete the whole plan?
Well, actually, the start date would be April 1st.
Okay.
They would come in, they would mobilize, give us a plan as far as which facilities they would assess first. Their team would come in, look at every facility along with our staff. As they're doing that, they're concurrently putting information to our new software system that we will get from them also.
Okay. And so that's some fast work
Yes,
for
it
that
is.
report. But then I guess the second question that I have then is the facilities master plan is more of an assessment of the current state, and it's not, for lack of a better word, aspirational or looking at future goals. I said that as a statement. It's really a question. So if 100 people are in this office, it doesn't ask what would it look like if the county needed 150 people. It just says to maintain the current state in good operating order, this is what we need to plan for. Is that correct?
That is partially correct. So when they
Get me there.
So when they come in and do the assessment of our facility, I'm gonna use 2020 as an example. So if they came in and did an assessment of 2020, they are going to be speaking to staff. They are going to be looking at speaking to staff and trying to address space needs as far as space assessment. So the facilities master plan is something that they would give us. It would give us, it's basically a living document. So it's a point in time, as you spoke of, where it does give us a current assessment, but it also gives us options as far as predictive forecasting. So if we were to put another 20 employees in this space, how would that look, or how should it look, or would the space actually be able to handle it? So,
That's great. That is a better answer than I thought I was going to get. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Ms. Thompson, yes.
Yes, thank you. On the 2020 and 2000, I want to remind council that, we have 3.5 mils every year that we get that is allocated for capital improvements. This year, we did budget over $2 million at 2020. We will be, or toward our facilities in general. You'll start to see some things happening down on the first floor or on the main level, on the second level, very shortly to enhance customer experience. And then very soon, we will have an architect that's going to be redesigning all of our public restrooms.
So you will start to see that to be implemented as well.
All right, any further discussion? Administrator Brown?
Good job, Mr. Williams. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Williams.
So as we wrap up this session, one of the things that we thought was important in this particular year, as you've done so many things in setting the strategic plan and beginning to implement some of the strategies, is to talk about those long-term needs and put those things at the top of your mind as we're going into this next budget year. So some of these larger projects that are kind of ongoing things that we know are going to be future needs, we wanted to tackle those. Certainly hear some of the feedback that you had if there were other thoughts about projects so that you could see how your budgetary decisions would affect all of those things, considering the money that we have. So that's why we wanted to make sure that this particular strategic forum, we focus on what is the capital outlook of the county, what is the potential financial position for additional capital improvements, and how that would tie into these decisions that you'll be making in this coming up budget cycle, separate and apart from any requests that you would receive from the administrator or any other departments or officials. I think you have a couple hands, Madam Chair.
Oh, Councilwoman Teresia. Is your mic over there? Thank you.
Thanks, and I'm sorry that I missed part of the other presentation. But the 75 million that was spoken about in the previous session, how is that reflected in these projects here? I guess I'm not seeing the 75 million, or not sure how multiple projects maybe add up, or is even in here.
Sure. So the idea of the amounts, as we talked about, were really more capacity driven. We do know that we have needs at Alvarez Glen Detention Center. If you wanted to try to do some math, you could say that they mentioned there was 40 million for that. They mentioned 36 million for the EOC. So if you just wanted to do those two projects, that would be roughly the 75 million. But again, the main focus was, while we talk kind of theoretical, we want to give you real life projects that we know are potential needs for the county. So that would potentially be the 75 million if the council so chose it to be.
And Mr. Brown, I saw in the list there were some updates being made to fire stations. Is there a complete plan for fire stations as a whole?
So I think historically there was a plan. What we would need to do, much like we did with the kind of the magistrates facilities, we would need to update that, considering the growth of the county, considering some of the other components down that have been added that weren't previously a part of that plan. So that would be something that we would need to work with to include. And that would be a good example of having a conversation and what other things that we might want to make sure that we have included.
Thank you. Ms. English.
I didn't know if this was my time, but you know me. Okay, I wanted to talk about accessibility, not just from an ADA compliance, but accessibility as it relates to the citizens in Richland County that need that additional support. And I can just give you one example. When we go out to do our ribbon cutting in them little bitty chairs that a lot of us cannot sit in, the elders can't get up from, just little things like that to help make citizens, when they're coming into Richland County, feel more comfortable.
And that's a great point. And I see our operational staff back there shaking their heads. I think a lot of things that you will find, and one of the specific things the county has done to try to address this idea of equity and inclusion is, in addition to the services that we provide in general, we're not going to put it all on one person's back, but we've hired somebody, Dr. Philip Harris, to really help us to focus on areas where the county may not have traditionally done. And that would be one of those areas. So certainly operational services, but then direct support within our organization to make sure, to your point, we are touching all citizens' lives. So physical accessibility, language accessibility, just general technological accessibility. These are all conversations that are being had today very specifically. And I appreciate you bringing it up as a council member, because it helps reaffirm that to our team.
Well, one of the things I want people to understand is that I actually work with people with developmental disabilities. And so I've been doing that, working with mental health for a long time. But then as a person with a disability, you also see the other side of that coin as well. And so the needs that are there, what people are struggling with, what we hear. And so that's very important, not just to me, but for inclusion into everyday things like parks, recreation, being able to go to a grocery store, just little things. And I know we've made a lot of progress as a county, but I'd like to see us make more. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. English. And that made me think of something else when you talked about just accessibility and everyone being able to access. You know, our county is very large, and we're now seeing growth in many other parts of the county. And so when we look at the facility studies at all, does it look at where things are located? Right now, everything is centrally located downtown. We are starting to utilize the Columbia Mall for facilities, but are we evaluating the need to have county facilities anywhere else in our county that are not downtown because of the growth and the need for folks to be able to get there? I don't know if there's looking at anything, an upcoming study or not.
Yes, I'm going to actually ask Deputy Director Reynolds if he could address that. Do you have an idea? I know you mentioned predictive forecasting. Is that something that is a part of that process, or would there just be a kind of a different look? So that's something that we would basically need to separately see about including. And so I know we got folks taking notes, so we can put all those types of things in our potential requests related to the budget this year.
All right, hearing no other question or comments, Mr. Brown?
So that will bring us to our lunch period. And so certainly hope that you enjoy lunch. Ms. Carrillo, is lunch going to be in the same room next to us over here? So lunch will be in the same room where breakfast was. So we'll see you after lunch. I hope that you have a good lunch, and thank you for this morning. That concludes our morning session.